fellow human beings, Power Gamer here, and one of the worst things about video games is being tied down to one specific location in order to play them. Well, we'll just see what I can do about that.
This is amazing.
Super Mario Land, a classic's little brother. This game is often overlooked when talking about classic Mario games, but it still has an important place in history as it was the first Mario game ever released for a portable system. The game was made for the Nintendo Game Boy, the company's first portable game system, aside from the Game & Watch series, which were little LCD games made in the early 80s. The CEO of Nintendo at the time, Hiroshi Yamauchi, wanted a game that would help promote the release of the upcoming system, so Nintendo R&D 1 was tasked with creating it under the leadership of the Game Boy's creator, Gunpei Yokoi. Surprisingly, this was the first Mario game to be developed without the series creator Shigeru Miyamoto, so the development team used many elements that were new to the Mario series, and the game was originally going to be the pack-in title for the Game Boy, much like Super Mario Bros. Was for the NES, but Nintendo decided to go with Tetris instead, which was probably the right call if I'm being honest. The game was released as a launch title for the Game Boy on April 21st, 1989 in Japan, July 31st, 1989 in North America, September 28th, 1990 in Europe, and November 21st, 1990 in Australia. The game was an instant success, becoming the second best-selling game of 1989 in North America, behind Tetris, and eventually sold 18 million copies, which was even more than that of Super Mario Bros. 3. The game was highly praised at the time of its release, but many people were just impressed that there existed a portable Mario game, since most portable game systems were incredibly simple at the time. As time passed, people still hold this game in high regard, but not as high as the console Mario games. The game would later be followed up with a sequel, Super Mario Land 2, which was also released for the Game Boy in 1992.
This is one of the few Mario games that I have never played before, so I'm not entirely sure what I'm getting myself into, but I am curious to check it out, so let's pop it in and give it a go.
The story is actually a bit different from previous Mario games. Instead of the Mushroom Kingdom, the game takes place in Sarasaland. The princess of Sarasaland, Daisy, has been kidnapped by an evil spaceman named Tatanga. So Mario travels to Sarasaland to save her. Okay, the story's not that different from before, but it does switch things up with us saving Daisy from Tatanga instead of Peach from Bowser. In fact, Peach, Bowser, and even Luigi aren't in this game at all. This is the game where Daisy first made her debut, and it is currently the only mainline Mario game she appears in. Any other games that feature her are spin-offs, and Tatanga was never seen again after this. The game's graphics are pretty limited, but given that this was a launch title for the original Game Boy, that makes total sense. But they are able to do some pretty creative background elements, like giving the level a water theme, a temple theme, or a sky theme. It's not much, but it is more than the original Super Mario Bros. The music is also pretty limited and a bit compressed, but it is still well composed, and there's even more songs in here than there were in Mario 1 and the Lost Levels.
Honestly, the best way to describe both the visuals and the gameplay is it's Super Mario Bros. On the Game Boy.
The gameplay is nearly identical to that of the original Super Mario Bros. And the Lost Levels. You move right to reach the end of the stage, jump on enemies, and collect power-ups. The Mushroom and Star return, and they act the same, but instead of the Fire Flower, we get the Super Ball Flower. Instead of fireballs, you shoot Super Balls, which bounce around the stage. While this can be useful for hitting enemies above you, you can only shoot down, and you can't shoot a second one until the first one disappears. Some of the stronger enemies take 2 hits to kill, and since this game came out before Mario 3, it still doesn't give you an extra hit point. So the Super Ball Flower, while decent, is overall worse than the Fire Flower. And unsurprisingly, this was the only Mario game the Super Ball Flower appeared in until Super Mario Maker 2. You can still go down pipes to find secret areas, you get an extra life by collecting 100 coins, and instead of green mushrooms for extra lives, we have hearts. Which makes sense since original Game Boy games weren't in color unless you play them on something like the Super Game Boy or the Game Boy Advance, which is what I'm doing. The only enemies from the console games that are here are Goombas, Koopa Troopas, Piranha Plants, Bullet Bills, and I think these are supposed to be Cheep Cheeps, but I'm not certain. They act the same except for Bullet Bills, which no longer stay down if you stand next to them, and Koopa Troopas, which instead of hiding in their shells, explode.
Yes, the Koopa Troopas in this game freaking explode.
The game also introduces a bunch of new enemies, and some of them are just weird. You've got sphinxes and seahorses that spit fireballs, robots that launch their heads, giant spiders, flying tiki heads, moai statues with limbs. This game is all over the place in terms of enemies, and unlike Mario 2, none of them return for future Mario games. The most annoying enemies by far, though, are these jumping girls that hold out their arms like zombies, because when you jump on them, they stay down for a few seconds and they get right back up. The only way to actually kill them is to off-screen them. The biggest difference from the older Mario games, though, is the way the levels end. Instead of a flagpole, you reach these big spires with 2 doors, one low and one high. If you go in the lower one, you just go straight to the next level, but if you get up to the higher one, you get taken to this bonus game where you can earn some extra lives. You just need to press the button when Mario's on the platform you want, but there's also a ladder which can send you up or down. You can get 1 life, 2 lives, 3 lives, or a flower. The other biggest difference with this game, though, is the length. While the levels themselves are longer than that of Mario 1, this is easily the shortest game in the series so far. The original Super Mario Bros. And the Lost Levels had 8 worlds with 4 levels levels each. Mario 2 USA had 7 worlds with 3 levels each, except for the last one, which had 2. Super Mario Land has only 4 worlds with 3 levels each, so we went from 32 levels to 20 levels to only 12. This game is also a lot easier than previous games, since you get much more lives thanks to the bonus game.
But despite this game being a Game Boy game, it actually does a bit to shake up the traditional Mario formula, specifically with the final levels of World 2 and World 4.
These levels take the form of a 2D shooter game like Gradius or Life Force. World 2, you're underwater in a submarine, and World 4, you're flying a plane in the sky. You just move around shooting enemies and blocks. While these levels are simple, they're pretty fun, and probably the best levels in the game since they bring some very enjoyable variety. Sadly, with this game being an early Mario game, it suffers from a lot of the same problems as the original. One of them being you can't go backwards, another one being that a game over sends you all the way back to the beginning of the game, only this time you get one continue, so I guess that's better. But hands down, the biggest problem with this game is the controls. This game has some of the stiffest controls I've ever seen in a platformer, let alone in a Mario game. I'd say about 70% of my deaths came from just barely undershooting or overshooting a jump. It's even easier to slip off a platform in this game than it was previously. There were a bunch of moments where I just barely made a jump. I counted way too many times where I pressed the jump button and nothing happened. And there's this. Why did they put that there? This game also suffers from the same problems as both the original Super Mario Bros. And the first Mega Man game, where the jumping feels pretty wonky and the gravity is turned up to maximum when you're falling. So if you jump, you fall kinda slowly, but if you just fall, you plummet straight to the ground. This game also has an obsession with these tiny platforms that fall right after you land on them. So you have to press the jump button instantly or else you're dead.
Game overs in this game aren't as brutal as they were previously since the game's a lot shorter, but it's still really annoying to constantly die from stuff you have no control over.
Like before you fight a boss at the end of each world, and thankfully they all look different, but you take them out in similar ways. World 1 has a giant sphinx that shoots fireballs, and much like Bowser, you just need to get past him and hit this button. Go through this gate, and you find Daisy? Okay, that is hilarious. World 2 is the submarine level, and the boss is a giant seahorse that spits at you, and for some reason it makes this weird buzzing noise when you hit it. World 3 is a totem that throws rocks at you, and again, you have to hit the button. I think you're supposed to jump on the rocks to get over him, but I just took a hit and ran through. And we finally reach World 4. It can be frustrating, but it's nowhere near as rough as the final worlds in the NES games. The last level in the world and the game is the airplane level, and the boss is a giant cloud, because why not? It floats around shooting at you, and it's pretty simple. After it dies, Tatanga shows up. He moves up and down and shoots 3 bullets at you, and that's pretty much it. For a final boss, this fight is really easy. After his ship explodes and he presumably dies, Mario finally saves Daisy. Better not let Peach know about this. They fly off in a spaceship, and the game ends.
Game conquered. Super Mario Land, while impressive for the time, is a bit dated. A lot of Game Boy games don't age too well because of the limited hardware, and I think Super Mario Land is one of those games. It's still a good game, don't get me wrong, but there's not much of a reason to play it anymore other than the novelty. If you can find it for cheap, it's a decent way to kill an hour or two, but I wouldn't say this is a must-play. I mean, its whole gimmick was being able to finally play a Mario game wherever you want, and that's not that impressive anymore.
Yes! I beat Bowser!